The wind was screaming through Wallowa Valley that night, the kind of wind that rattled windows like old bones. The oil lamp on the wooden table shook with each gust, casting a trembling halo over the bed where Caleb Whitefeather lay dying. Talia pressed her hands against his chest, feeling the fragile rise and fall beneath his wool blanket. His skin, once the color of sun-warmed earth, had turned the brittle gray of river stones in winter. Each breath came jagged. Outside, the wheat fields whispered like they knew the storm was coming. "Papa," she said, her voice raw, "you need to save your strength." Caleb's eyes fluttered open, cloudy but sharp when they found her. "Strength," he rasped, a smile tugging at the corner of his cracked lips. "Strength's for the living girl." "Don't," she whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "Don't talk like that." But Caleb Whitefeather had always talked like the wind itself, blunt, cold, impossible to argue with. He struggled to lift his hand, resting it on hers with the weight of a promise. "Talia, look at me." She didn't want to, but she did. His blue-gray eyes, her mother's people called them sky eyes, were fierce, like he still had one more fight in him. He'd built this farm with those hands. He'd defended it when the valley was still wild and the white men were staking their claims. And now the land might outlive him, but maybe not her. "If you don't fight for this land," he said, voice splintering like dry cedar, "then everything I bled for dies with me." Her breath caught. That sentence would carve itself into her bones before the night ended. "Papa, please." "You promised me," he hissed, coughing blood into the rag she held against his mouth. "Say it." Her throat burned, but she said it. "I promise." Something in his gaze eased. He squeezed her hand once, just once, then exhaled like the valley wind itself. And then he was gone. The house went so quiet, she could hear the clock ticking on the wall, counting a world without him. Talia didn't cry right away. She sat beside him in the flickering lamplight, her mind blank except for the echo of that promise. The world outside didn't care. The wheat still swayed in the night. The wind still roared down from the mountains. It wasn't until a branch scraped against the roof like fingernails that her composure cracked. She pressed her forehead to the rough wool of her father's blanket, and the sob tore out of her like something too old to belong to a girl of 22. They buried him on the ridge the next morning, where the land overlooked the gold of the wheat fields and the dark green line of pines beyond. The preacher mumbled something about heaven, about rest. But Talia wasn't listening. Her boots were half buried in mud. The valley smelled of smoke and storm. Only 3 people came. Maggie Crowsong stood beside her, small and wiry, her braid dark as raven feathers, hands clutching a bundle of wild sage. She laid it on the fresh mound of dirt. "He's part of the land now," Maggie whispered. Talia didn't answer. She couldn't. Behind them stood Russ Holloway, the deputy, broad, blonde, smug. He'd once courted her when they were teenagers, back when she still thought kindness could be found in everyone. That was before he learned she wasn't just Caleb's daughter. She was also Willow's. Nez Perce blood. Half-blood. That made her something less than acceptable in his world. When the preacher walked away, Russ stepped closer. "I'm sorry for your loss, Talia." His voice was smooth like whiskey left too long in the sun. She knew better than to drink it. "You should go," she said flatly. He ignored that. "This land is too much for one person, especially a woman alone. Winter's coming. Debt's knocking. You've got options." Her jaw locked. "I've got a promise." Russ tilted his hat back and let his smile turn wolfish. "Promises won't pay the bank." She turned away before he could see the fire in her eyes. If she stayed, she'd spit on his boots, and she didn't have time for that. Not anymore. By the time she returned to the house, rain had started to spit against the porch roof. The barn creaked in the wind. The fields, usually a warm gold, now looked dark and heavy under the bruised sky. She walked out barefoot into the edge of the wheat. The stalks whispered against her legs. They were ready. The harvest should have been started 3 days ago, before her father stopped breathing right, before everything changed. She tightened her shawl around her shoulders. If she didn't cut the wheat before the big storm hit, the entire crop would mold. And if the crop was lost, so was the land. She picked up her father's old scythe from where it leaned against the fence. The wooden handle was worn smooth by years of his hands. She pressed her palms against it like a prayer. The first swing was clumsy. The second sliced clean. By the fifth, her hands burned with raw blisters. But she kept going, because that's what he would have done. The rain thickened cold and mean. Her hair plastered to her face. Her breath came fast. But she refused to stop. If she stopped now, she'd never start again. She didn't notice the dark figure at the tree line until a gust of wind lifted the wheat just enough for her to see movement. A man. Broad-shouldered. Long hair tied back. A rifle slung over his back like he'd been born with it. He stood there watching, not moving, not hiding either. Just watching. Her grip on the scythe tightened. "You can keep on walking," she shouted over the wind. "Ain't nothing here for you." The man didn't reply. He simply tilted his head like he was weighing the shape of her soul. Then another gust came harder. Her boot slipped on wet earth. The scythe nearly flew from her hands. She went down to one knee, mud soaking her skirt. By the time she got her bearings, the man was gone. The wheat whispered louder. The storm growled closer. That night, after she hung her soaked dress by the fire, Maggie knocked on her door with a basket of dried sage and willow bark. "You're working too hard, Talia," she said. "This storm's not kind." "I don't have a choice," Talia replied. "Yes, you do," Maggie said softly. "You can ask for help. From who?" "From Russ," the bitterness cracked like thunder in her voice. "You know what kind of help he offers." Maggie's eyes softened. "There are other kinds of help. Your father had friends. Friends don't come running for a half-blood girl with a dying farm." Maggie set the basket down on the table and touched Tahlia's arm. "You're not just a half-blood girl. You're Caleb's daughter. Don't you forget it." When Maggie left, the wind was howling again. Tahlia stared at the scythe propped against the door, her hands bandaged and raw. She didn't sleep much, not because of fear, because of the weight of that promise. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the sky still held that low gray that meant the next storm was already building somewhere in the mountains. She poured black coffee into her tin mug, stared out the window, and saw something that made her heart jolt. A plume of campfire smoke curled up from the edge of the forest. She walked to the porch barefoot, the wood cold beneath her feet. Her fingers brushed the scythe's worn handle, and she could almost hear Caleb's voice in the wind. "You fight for this land." Whoever he was, the man in the trees, he hadn't passed through. He'd stayed. She headed down toward the lower fence line, heart thudding against her ribs. The frost still clung to the grass, making each step crunch like bone. As she neared the tree line, she spotted it clearly, a small lean-to fire carefully built, and beside it, him. The same man, tall, solid, a mountain man if she'd ever seen one. His clothes were rough buckskin, his beard thick, eyes sharp, and he wasn't surprised to see her. He rose slowly, hands open, showing no weapon. His voice was low like the creek after snowmelt. "I didn't come to steal your land, miss. I came to repay a debt your father never called in." Talia's breath caught. She hadn't expected a voice like that, quiet, steady, sure. And hearing her father's name in a stranger's mouth set something twisting in her gut. She didn't lower the scythe. "Then you've got the wrong farm." He didn't flinch. "No. I've got the right one." The valley wind swept through the wheat between them, carrying the storm smell closer. The man glanced at the fields like he already knew their fate if the harvest failed. "I'll be nearby," he said simply, and walked back to the fire. Talia stood alone at the fence, the scythe heavy in her hands, her father's voice still echoing in her ears. A storm on the horizon, a stranger at her door, a promise hanging over everything like thunder. The fire at the edge of the woods was still burning when Talia stepped outside with her coffee. The sky was pewter gray, heavy with the hush of an approaching storm, and the air smelled like cold iron and pine. She leaned against the porch post mug, cupped between her blistered palms, watching smoke curl through the still branches, like it had every right to be there. He hadn't left. Part of her had expected, hoped he would. But there it was, a lean-to smoke rising, and somewhere within it, that mountain of a man with the quiet voice and eyes that saw too much. She took a long drink from the tin mug, the bitterness waking the rest of her nerves. Her body ached. Her hands throbbed under the bandages. The wheat field waited, accusing her with every breath of wind. She didn't have time for mysteries, or debts she hadn't signed for. Still, when she should have gone back inside, she set the cup down and pulled on her boots. The ground squelched underfoot, damp from last night's storm. The wheat was slick with dew, the stalks sagging but unbroken. She crossed the field in silence, the kind of silence that had weight to it, until she reached the trees. He was there, kneeling by the fire, sharpening a blade slowly with a whetstone. A different blade than before. Longer curved, ancient-looking. His head lifted as she approached, but he didn't stand, didn't reach for anything. Just looked at her like he'd been waiting all morning. "I said you could keep walking," Talia began. "And I said I came to repay a debt." He looked down at the blade again, ran the stone once more across the edge. "Your father never called it in, but he should have." She narrowed her eyes. "You knew him, Caleb Whitefeather. Built that house with his own hands. Fought off a band of rustlers one winter with nothing but a shotgun and a busted ankle." He gave a small shrug. "You don't forget a man like that." She didn't relax, but she stepped a little closer. "What kind of debt?" 3 years back. I was hunting a ridge near Snake River. Got caught in a rock slide, shattered my collarbone. Would have died if I'd stayed there overnight." She blinked. "That ridge is 20 miles north." He nodded. "I dragged myself down far enough to reach the fence line of a homestead. Your father was stringing barbed wire. He found me, took me in, fed me, kept me from infection. Never asked for my name, never asked why I was out there alone. Just said, 'Man's down. You help him up.'" She folded her arms. He never mentioned it. He wouldn't have. A crow cawed overhead, loud and abrupt, like it had been listening in. Talia chewed the inside of her cheek. The wind was picking up again, and the storm was closer now. She could feel it in her knees. "You got a name?" she asked finally. "Elias. Elias Ridgewalker." She studied him a long moment. "That's a mountain man's name if I've ever heard one." He cracked half a smile. "Used to be. You're not now." "I'm not much of anything now," he said, and stood. He was taller than she remembered. Thick-built, not with the muscle of youth, but of someone who'd worked for every meal. His coat was mended in places, boots patched with rawhide. But there was nothing broken in the way he stood, nothing soft in the way he looked at the world. "I'm not looking for charity," she said, tilting her chin. "And I can't pay you. I'm not asking for pay. I can't feed you either. I eat light." She frowned. "You planning to stay? I need work. You need help." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I'll take payment after the harvest is sold." Her breath caught. That was too generous, too dangerous. She stepped back. "Why? What do you want?" Elias didn't blink. "I didn't come to steal your land, miss. I came to repay a debt your father never called in." And there it was again, that sentence calm and heavy like a man setting down something precious. Like he wasn't just offering labor, he was offering history. Tahlia exhaled through her nose, considering. Her shoulders sagged. The storm would hit in a day, maybe less. She had 30 acres of wheat. Her hands were already ruined. She didn't have a choice. "I've got one extra room," she said slowly. "It ain't much." "I've slept under worse roofs," Elias replied. "Don't expect warm meals or conversation. I don't expect anything." He picked up his pack, slung it over his shoulder. "I'll start with the south edge of the field." She narrowed her eyes again. "You don't even know where the property line is." "I'll walk it. I've got an eye for fences." He started walking before she could argue. Talia stood there for a moment longer, watching his back as he crossed into the wheat. The man walked like he didn't just know the land, like he belonged to it. Like he could hear what it was trying to say. She didn't follow right away. She looked up at the sky, dull silver, thick with pressure. Then she turned back to the house, the porch, the door that no longer opened to a father's voice. She would give this stranger one day. No more. By the time the sun hit its highest point, Elias had already cleared a quarter acre. His movements were quiet, economical. The cradle scythe moved like part of his body, catching and laying down wheat in perfect rows. Talia watched him from the porch steps, a wrapped biscuit untouched in her hand. She didn't like how he made it look easy. That was supposed to be her burden. But then she saw the slight hitch in his gait, the way his left leg dragged just slightly. An old injury, maybe. Something broken and healed wrong. And yet he didn't complain, didn't stop. When dusk fell, she called him in. He washed up at the pump, hair dripping, sleeves rolled. She set stew on the table. He ate with care, grateful, not greedy. "You don't talk much," she said. "Talking's for men who don't work." She gave a dry huff. "You've got an answer for everything, huh?" "Just the important parts." After dinner, he helped her bring in firewood without being asked. Didn't ask questions about the pictures on the wall, or the empty chair, or the rifle she always kept near, that she appreciated. When he retired to the spare room, she lingered by the hearth, staring into the orange glow. For the first time in a week, she wasn't completely alone in the house. The storm didn't come that night, but the clouds hung low and the morning air was tight with electricity. When she stepped outside, she heard the grinding stone before she saw him. Elias was already up, already sharpening the blade. He didn't look at her as she stepped onto the porch, but his voice cut through the cool morning air. "We've got 3 days before that next front rolls in." She crossed her arms. "You planning to tell me what to do now?" He said simply, "I'm planning to get that field cut before your roof caves in." She stared at him a long time, trying to read the truth in his tone. But all she could see was a man who showed up when she didn't ask, who worked like he meant it, and who spoke like he knew things didn't wait. The first swing of the cradle scythe sliced through the wheat like a whisper. Neat, clean. Talia stood at the edge of the south field, arms folded, watching Elias work as the early sun climbed behind him. The golden stalks bowed and fell in perfect rows, as if they knew better than to resist. He moved like the wind, steady, quiet, efficient. No wasted motion, no flourish, just muscle and memory. He moves through wheat like he's part of it, not cutting it, just asking it to fall, she murmured under her breath, almost surprised at the softness of her own voice. She had seen hired hands work before. Her father had taken on drifters some years when the crop came early or the weather turned too soon. They'd sweat and grunt and curse their way across the fields. But Elias, he didn't complain. He didn't even breathe hard. He swung like he was born doing it. Her pride bristled at that. It shouldn't be this easy. She turned back toward the barn, arms tight across her chest. Maybe letting him stay had been a mistake. The more he worked, the more she felt like a guest on her own land. And she hated it. Still, the neat lines of harvested wheat didn't lie. He was getting it done faster than she could have dreamed. She grabbed the water jug and a pair of cups and returned down the slope toward where Elias was binding the last row. His back was slick with sweat. The faint smell of crushed grain and sun-baked earth clung to the air. "You break often?" she asked, handing him the cup. He took it without a word and drank long. "Only when I'm reminded to." "You're gonna need reminding every time." He set the cup down and wiped his brow. "Probably." She squinted at him. "You're a quiet one, Elias Ridgewalker. And you're not. Not sure if that's a compliment." He shrugged. Didn't say it was or wasn't. She looked down at the rows behind him, the wind combing through what was left. "You've done more in a morning than I managed in 2 days." "You tried with the wrong tool," he said simply. She glanced down. "My father's scythe." Elias gave her a long look. "Tools ain't sacred. People are." She didn't answer that. They worked together the rest of the morning. Elias cutting, Talia trailing behind, gathering and binding sheaves with trembling hands. She hadn't done it this way since she was a girl, helping her father, and her muscles reminded her with every bend and twist. By midday, her palms were raw again, beneath the bandages. She bit her lip and didn't say a word. Elias noticed. Of course he did. "Take a rest," he said, pausing his swing. "I'm fine. You're bleeding through." She looked down. Red blotches seeped through the cotton wrap. She hadn't even felt it. "Fine," she muttered, dropping onto a nearby rock. Elias crouched next to her, pulling a clean cloth from his coat pocket. "Let me see." She hesitated. "I've tended worse wounds in worse places," he added. "I'm not some helpless farm girl. Didn't say you were." She let him unwrap the bandages. His hands were rough but careful, like someone who knew how to be gentle when it counted. She watched his face instead of her hands, saw the small scar near his temple, the faint line under his right eye, stories she hadn't heard yet. "Why are you really here?" she asked. "I told you. Debt's a funny thing. Most men let it pass." "I'm not most men." "No," she said quietly. "You're not." Later that afternoon, as they worked the north edge, Talia caught movement near the ridge trail. A figure on horseback. She shielded her eyes from the sun. "Maggie." Talia's shoulders eased slightly. The small woman rode in with her usual mix of fire and feathers. She dismounted in one fluid motion, her dress hiked slightly to reveal leather boots and a medicine bag slung over her shoulder. "You look like you've been through hell," Maggie said by way of greeting, eyeing Talia's hands. "Feels about right." Maggie's eyes shifted to Elias, who had set the cradle scythe aside and was watching with unreadable calm. "And this must be the mountain man," she said. "Elias Ridgewalker," Talia offered. "He's helping with the harvest." I see that Maggie said, her gaze flicking from him to the neat rows of wheat. "Guess I should have brought more stew." She pulled a bundle from her bag salve, new cloth, a jar of something that smelled like cedar. "Your hands need rest. They don't have time." "They'll take it anyway," Maggie snapped, sitting beside her. "You want to keep this land, you need to stay standing." Talia bit the inside of her cheek. "I know." Maggie softened. "And I heard in town Russ Holloway's been sniffing around the bank again." Elias glanced up at that. Talia stiffened. "Let him sniff." "He's not sniffing," Maggie said. "He's circling. Like a wolf that smells blood." Elias stood slowly brushing wheat chaff from his sleeves. "What kind of pressure's he applying?" Maggie raised an eyebrow. "You planning on helping with that too, mountain man?" Elias didn't flinch. "If it means keeping her land, yeah." Talia stared at him. He hadn't even looked at her when he said it. She stood brushing off her skirt. "It's my fight." "No one said otherwise," Elias replied. Maggie watched the two of them like she was reading a story in a language only she knew. "Well," she said, finally rising, "I'll be back in 2 days, if the storm doesn't drown the trail." "Appreciate you, Maggie. Someone has to." She climbed back on her horse and gave Elias one last glance. "Don't let her forget she's got fire in her blood." "I won't," he said. Maggie rode off, the sound of hooves fading into the trees. That night, Talia stood on the porch after supper, arms wrapped around herself. The wind was rising again, tugging at the corner of the roof. She looked out over the field. They'd made progress, but not enough. Inside, Elias sat near the fire, sharpening the scythe again, rhythm steady and calm. She turned back to the dark horizon, muttering to no one in particular. "If the sky holds 2 more days, we just might stand a chance." Behind her, Elias spoke without looking up, "We'll make it." She didn't answer, but she didn't argue. The next morning, Talia woke to the sound of hooves crunching gravel, and not Maggie's this time. From her window, she saw the shine of a badge and the too familiar smirk of Deputy Holloway. He was back, and this time he wasn't alone. Russ Holloway sat high in the saddle, like he thought he owned the whole damn valley. He wore his badge like a weapon, the silver catching morning light, just enough to make it shine harder than the man who wore it. Another rider flanked him, some local boy, trying too hard to look mean, couldn't have been more than 20, rifle slung awkward across his back. Talia met them at the gate, boots planted, arms crossed. Elias stood a few yards behind her, silent and still, the scythe in his hand catching a glint of sun like it was daring someone to say something stupid. Russ tipped his hat. "Morning, Miss Whitefeather." "Deputy," she replied. She didn't step back, didn't blink. "Word in town says you've taken on a hired hand," he said, gaze drifting toward Elias. "Funny thing, I don't remember issuing any work permits to out-of-town trappers." "Good thing you're not in charge of who swings a scythe on my land," she snapped. He chuckled, sliding down from his horse, with the ease of someone too confident in the laws he gets to bend. "Don't get riled. Just came to deliver a message from the bank. Foreclosure proceedings are moving faster than expected." Elias shifted slightly. Talia felt it more than saw it. "You don't get to come on my land and throw threats around like dirt," she said coldly. Russ leaned against the fence post, rubbing his jaw. "It's not a threat, Talia. It's simple math. Your father's last payment was missed 2 months before he passed. Add interest, overdue taxes. Well, it adds up fast. I'm working on it. The harvest'll cover it." Will it? He asked, eyebrow raised. You sure this arrangement you've got is enough to finish in time? She didn't respond. She didn't have to. Russ stepped in closer, voice dropping lower. You think that field's worth saving? Let's see what it's worth, soaked in your blood. Silence fell like a thunderclap. Behind her, she felt Elias take a single step forward. Russ's grin widened, smug and slow. Now I know that sounds harsh. What I meant was, this land's gonna break you if you let it. That's all. I'm not breaking, she said, voice shaking, but not from fear. His expression didn't change. I made an offer once. Still stands. Sell, now get out clean. You can't do this forever. I don't need forever, she said. I need 2 weeks. Russ clicked his tongue. 2 weeks is a long time in storm season. He looked to Elias again. You her bodyguard now. Elias didn't speak. He didn't move. That silence did more than words ever could. Russ's smirk faltered for just a breath. Then he mounted up again, slow and deliberate. Clock's ticking, Talia. Tick too long, and the law won't be half as polite next time. He turned the horse with a sharp jerk and trotted off the young rider behind him, trying to look dangerous, but barely holding on to his saddle. When they were gone, Talia realized her fists were clenched so tight her nails had broken skin. Elias walked past her without a word, heading for the tool shed. She followed. He picked up the whetstone and sat on the edge of the bench, slowly dragging it along the scythe's edge. You want to talk about that? She asked finally. No. You want to punch something? He didn't stop sharpening. I've met men like him before. Yeah, they push, because no one's ever pushed back. She sat down across from him, hands folded. Well, I've pushed. All my life. Ain't done me much good. It kept this land yours, didn't it? She laughed once, dry. For now. Elias met her eyes, slow and steady. You've got backbone, Talia. But you're bleeding from too many places to fight alone. I'm not afraid of him, she said. No, Elias agreed. You're afraid of losing what he wants. That silence crept back in, heavy and true. They worked until dusk. Neither of them mentioned Holloway again, but he hung over the day like smoke. Each swing of the blade was sharper, angrier. Talia tied the sheaves tighter than she needed to. By the time they stopped, the sun had dropped low, and the sky was boiling purple with heat and thunder. Inside, they ate in silence. Elias chewed slow, shoulders tight. When he finally spoke, it came out flat, but fierce. If he comes back, I won't just stand still. Talia looked up. I don't want this to get ugly. He met her gaze. It's already ugly. She swallowed hard. If we finish this harvest, the farm's safe. The bank can't touch it once I sell. You believe that I have to? He nodded once, like that answer was enough for now. After supper, Elias went to the barn to check the tools. Talia stayed behind, washing dishes with hands that trembled more from rage than exhaustion. Her father would have chased Holloway off with a shotgun and a sermon. But she didn't have her father's voice. She only had her own, and it had to be loud enough to carry. The wind rose outside, howling low through the eaves. The storm wasn't far now. She walked out onto the porch, arms wrapped tight across her chest. The fields swayed in the dim light, whispering like they knew something was coming. And they did. Behind her, Elias returned quietly and stood beside her without a word. After a moment, she said, You ever think about walking away? He nodded. Every day. What stops you? His eyes stayed on the fields, knowing I'm the only one who won't. They woke to the sound of thunder the next morning. but it passed overhead, rolling east. The storm had spared them for now. They moved fast. Every hour mattered. Tahlia bound while Elias cut. When her hands gave out, she switched to raking. When his leg dragged, she forced him to take water. The air was thick and hot, a tension pressing down on everything. But the field was shrinking. Row by row, acre by acre. She was starting to believe they might actually do it. Until late afternoon, when she saw Elias stumble. The scythe dropped from his hand. His leg buckled. He went down hard. Elias, she ran to him, her panic clawing up her throat. He was breathing, but his face was pale, jaw tight. "Just give me a second," he muttered. "You're done," she said, crouching beside him. "The hell I am. You pushed too far. You're hurt." He tried to stand. Failed. She grabbed his arm and threw it over her shoulder. "Come on! You're going back to the house. I can't. You can't finish this harvest with a busted leg." "Elias." He cursed under his breath, but leaned into her pain, stealing his fight. They limped together back toward the house, clouds thickening behind them. The storm hadn't missed. It had just been waiting. The rain started as a whisper, soft, rhythmic taps against the roof. But by the time they reached the porch, it was a full roar, a wall of water blurring the edge of the world. Thunder cracked above them, sharp as a gunshot. Talia tightened her grip on Elias's waist and hauled him up the steps, his weight heavy but familiar now. Inside the house felt smaller than usual. The fire was out. The windows rattled with every gust of wind. She helped him to the chair near the hearth and grabbed a dry quilt from the back of the sofa, wrapping it around his shoulders before kneeling in front of him. "You're burning," she said. "I'll take a broken leg over a broken promise any day," he muttered. "Good," she shot back. "Because you've definitely got the leg." His breath came shallow. He leaned his head back against the wall, jaw clenched. The injury wasn't fresh, it was the old one, the one he never talked about. She'd noticed the limp, but never asked. Now she wished she had. She lit the lamp, then moved to the pantry, grabbing what she needed. Clean rags, a worn tin of her mother's salve, a flask of willow bark extract. Rain slammed the roof overhead, relentless. "You should have told me," she said, as she unwrapped his boot. "I knew the risk. I didn't." "You didn't ask." She glared at him. "So it's my fault you pushed yourself till your leg gave out." "No," he said quietly. "It's my fault I thought I was still 20. She couldn't help it. She huffed out a laugh, then bit her lip to hold in the rest. His leg was swollen, angry red around the knee. She soaked a cloth and pressed it gently against the skin. He flinched but didn't complain. She worked in silence for a while, focused on the task, unwrapping, cleaning, rubbing, in the thick herbal paste that smelled like pine and tobacco. Her fingers moved with muscle memory, the way her mother had taught her before fever took her. When she was done, she sat back on her heels, breathing hard. "You need to stay off it," she said. He looked down at her. His eyes were darker in the lamplight. "We don't have time." "We also don't have a replacement for you," she shot back. "If you cripple yourself, where does that leave either of us?" His jaw ticked. Then he leaned forward and pressed his hand over hers. "One day," he said, "I'll rest for one day, but only if the rain holds." She nodded once. "Deal." Thunder growled in the distance, low and drawn out like the earth was warning them both. She helped him to the cot in the side room, the one he hadn't used since the first night, too stubborn or too proud. He lay back with a quiet grunt, and she covered him with the thick quilt. She didn't ask if he was comfortable. She already knew the answer. Later she sat in the kitchen listening to the steady rhythm of the rain while wrapping her own hands. Her body ached, fingers raw from tying sheaves, from gripping rope, from carrying more than her share. She should have felt exhausted, but her heart was too full of fire. By the time night swallowed the valley, the storm was a living thing. It thrashed at the roof and screamed down the chimney. The old house groaned, boards shifting, nails creaking. Talia lit another lamp and brought it into the front room. Elias was awake, half sitting the fire, casting shadows over his face. "I've heard worse storms," he said. "That's supposed to be comforting." "No," he admitted. "Just true." She sat on the floor near him, drawing her knees to her chest. "You ever see a real tornado once? Oklahoma Territory. Watched it pick up a wagon and drop it in a lake." She whistled low. "How'd you survive?" ran the other direction. "Smart." He looked at her, serious now. She shook her head. "Closest we ever had was a windstorm in '71. Took the barn roof clean off. My father spent a week patching it back together with scrap wood and prayer." Elias smiled faintly. "Sounds like him." She looked at him, then really looked. "What else do you remember?" "About Caleb, yeah." He exhaled slow. "Kind eyes, honest hands. He didn't treat me like a stray animal. Most folks wouldn't have let me cross the porch. He gave me coffee. Told me about his wife. Told me about you." She blinked. "Me. Said you were sharp as a whip and twice as fast. Said the land didn't belong to him, it belonged to you. He was just keeping it warm." Talia felt something shift in her chest. A quiet ache. She stared into the fire. "I hated this place for a long time." Elias didn't speak. "I wanted to leave. I wanted more than dirt and wind and a name nobody could pronounce right. Then he got sick. And suddenly this place was everything." He leaned forward, careful of his leg. "Sometimes it takes loss to make something matter." She nodded, blinking fast. "Yeah." The room fell quiet, but it wasn't heavy. The fire crackled. Rain beat against the windows. Then she asked softly, "You ever see the ocean?" Elias smiled with just one corner of his mouth. "Once. California. Worked a cattle ranch near San Francisco." "What was it like?" He looked far away then. "Endless. Like standing at the edge of the world and realizing how small you really are. But not in a bad way. Like you're part of something bigger than yourself." She turned to him, surprised. "That's poetic." "I have my moments." She smiled. "Remind me to ask for more of them." They sat like that for a while, the storm outside no longer terrifying, just part of the world they lived in. Eventually, she stood. "You should rest." "You too, I will." She turned out the lamp and left the door half open. The next morning, the storm had passed. The world outside looked new, washed clean. But the damage was real. Elias stood at the edge of the porch, leaning on the cane she'd carved from an old fence post. His leg was stiff, but he could walk. Barely. Talia joined him, both of them surveying the field. Some of the sheaves had blown over. Piles of cut wheat scattered. But most of it held. "Could have been worse," he muttered. She nodded. "Could have been better, too." They spent the day resetting the blown rows. Elias worked slowly, limping but determined. She scolded him. He ignored her. Some things didn't change. Later that evening, sitting on the hay bales with their water cups, he asked, "What happens after the harvest?" She looked at him. "What do you mean? I mean, will you stay? Plant again? Sell the land?" Her stomach twisted. "I promised my father I'd keep it. That's not what I asked." She didn't answer right away. Then finally, I don't know. I've never let myself think that far ahead. He nodded. Maybe you should. The words weren't an accusation. They were an invitation. And she didn't know what scared her more, the idea of leaving or the thought of staying with no one but herself. The sun rose late behind a curtain of fog, draping the valley in soft gray light. The storm had passed, but the air still held the scent of wet earth and scorched wood. The kind of morning that felt suspended between seasons, between past and future. Talia stood at the edge of the wheat field, the damp soil cool under her boots. Elias was still inside, resting his leg like he promised, though she knew. It took every ounce of stubborn restraint he had not to limp back out and swing that scythe. She'd insisted on handling the north edge alone today. He hadn't argued, just gave her that look, the one that said more than words ever could. She needed the space anyway. The truth was, the storm had unsettled more than the fields. Something inside her had shifted, some fragile piece cracked open by thunder, and mended in silence by shared stories and the quiet comfort of being seen. She couldn't put a name to it yet, but she could feel it. Her fingers traced the worn leather on the handle of her father's old scythe. Caleb Whitefeather had cut this same field dozens of times. She could picture him now, broad shoulders bent under sun sweat in his beard, singing low in Cheyenne when the days got long. He didn't say much while working, but his silence had never felt like distance. It felt like depth, like roots. She knelt in the dirt, running her fingers through the stalks. "Help me get this right, Pop," she whispered. "Help me finish what you started." A breeze moved through the wheat, soft and slow. She took that as an answer. Later that morning, Elias emerged from the house leaning hard on the makeshift cane. His limp was worse today, but he didn't complain. He never did. She saw him from across the field and waved him off, but he came anyway, stubborn as an ox. "I told you to rest," she said when he reached her. "I did," he replied. "Then I got bored. You'll ruin that leg for good. Better than ruining the harvest." She rolled her eyes, but her lips twitched. "Fine. But no swinging the scythe. You rake. That's it." "Yes, ma'am." They fell into a rhythm. She cut, he raked. It was slower this way, but steadier, focused. And somehow the quiet between them was warmer now, easier. After an hour, she asked, "Did your family have land?" He paused, leaning on the rake. "No. Just mountains. Moved too much to settle. Always alone, not always." A small smile touched his lips. "Had a brother, younger, meaner." "What happened?" "War happened. He enlisted. I didn't." She said nothing. "Never came back," he added, voice lower. "Wasn't even 30. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded. "I've seen a lot of loss. Enough to know it never really leaves you. It just changes shape." She looked out over the wheat. "It gets quieter, though, doesn't it?" "Sometimes," he said. "Other times it sings." She smiled at that. "My father used to say, grief is just love with nowhere to go." Elias stared at her. He was a wise man. Too wise. Used to drive me mad. I once ran off for 3 days just to prove I could live without his wisdom. "What brought you back?" He showed up at the canyon where I was camping. Sat beside me. Didn't say a word. Just shared his bread and listened to the river. That sounds like him. She studied Elias. "You remember him better than I thought. I remember the way he made people feel." There was a silence after that, not heavy, just long. Then Elias said, "This land, it carries his memory like a second heartbeat. You can feel it if you're quiet." "I feel it all the time," she admitted, "and sometimes I hate it. That's part of grieving too." She nodded, eyes shining. "I miss him in every inch of this place, even the corners he never touched." Elias leaned the rake against a stump and sat on the edge, wincing slightly. "You ever think maybe he didn't just leave this land to you?" "What do you mean?" "Maybe he left you to the land." The words settled between them like ash from an old fire. Talia swallowed hard, caught off guard by the weight of it. "I don't know if I can carry that," she whispered. "You already are." They worked until noon, then broke for water and bread under the old cottonwood near the property line. Maggie had brought fresh preserves the day before, and Talia spread it thick on rough-cut slices. Elias ate in silence, eyes on the horizon. "You don't talk about yourself much," she said. "Not much to say." "I don't believe that for a second." He looked at her, amused. "Curious are we, only if you're interesting." He laughed, then sobered. "I've done things I'm not proud of. Wandered. Took jobs that didn't ask questions. You running from something, not anymore." She looked at him closely. "What changed you?" The word hung there. Simple. Solid. Tahlia blinked. "Me. You remind me what steady feels like. What right feels like." She looked away, heat crawling up her neck. "I'm just a girl trying not to drown in wheat." "You're more than that," he said. She didn't answer. But she didn't need to. That evening, after they finished laying the last of the north sheaves, she walked to the tree line alone. The sun was setting in fire across the valley, turning every stalk of wheat to gold. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind, to the land, to the memory of her father's voice echoing faintly in the way the trees moved. "You taught me how to hold a scythe," she whispered, "but you never taught me how to let go." And in that moment she understood. She didn't have to let go of him. She just had to make space for something new. Back at the house, Elias waited on the porch, rocking slowly in her father's old chair. She walked up to him, quiet. He looked at her like he already knew what she'd seen out there. "How much do we have left?" he asked. She glanced at the field. "A day, maybe 2. We'll make it." She nodded. "We will." But she didn't go inside. She sat beside him. The stars blinked awake and the night wrapped around them like a promise. The knock came just after sundown, 3 slow raps against the wooden door, firm enough to carry through the quiet of the house, but not urgent. Talia looked up from the table where she was sorting receipts and grain tags. Elias stood in the kitchen drying the last of the dishes, and his shoulders tensed at the sound. She stood, instinct twitching in her gut. You didn't get visitors this far out unless they had a reason, and most reasons weren't good after dark. Elias moved toward the door before she could. "I've got it," he said. She nodded, stepping to the side, but not far. He opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking, like they hadn't moved in years. A man stood on the porch, half lit by the glow from the oil lamp. Mid-40s, lean face, weathered by sun, and road beard just beginning to gray at the edges. His hat was dusted with red clay. He didn't smile. "Evenin'," he said. Elias didn't answer. The stranger looked past him toward Tahlia. "This the white feather place?" She stepped forward. "It is." "Who's asking?" The man removed his hat. "Name's Jody Keene. I rode in from Black Fork. Heard you were finishing the wheat." Talia frowned. That true or just what you say to get in a door? Jody hesitated. It's true, and not the only reason I'm here. She crossed her arms. Then say the rest. He looked down, thumbed the brim of his hat. I knew your father, a long time ago, fought beside him in the border wars. We had history. Elias's voice cut in low. Most men with history come knocking sooner. Jody looked up at him steady. And most men don't carry 20 years of shame before they do. Talia blinked confused. Wait, you knew my father when Jody stepped inside when Elias finally moved aside. He stood in the center of the room like someone stepping back into a place they'd only seen in dreams. Caleb and I rode together. Arizona territory. We were just kids chasing justice like it was something you could catch with a rifle and a badge. You were Rangers, Talia asked. Something like that. Jody looked around, eyes softening at the details, the coat rack, the cracked photo frame, the smell of cedar. Your father was the best of us. Never took a shot he didn't have to. Never left a man behind. Her chest tightened. She'd grown up on those stories, but hearing them from someone else, someone real, hit different. So why now, she asked. Why show up when the harvest's almost done because I owe him something? Jody said. And I heard the land was in danger. Talia glanced at Elias, whose face was unreadable. She turned back. We don't need saving. Jody nodded. Didn't say you did. Just thought maybe I could help carry what's left. Elias finally spoke again. And if help wasn't what you brought, Jody held his gaze, then I wouldn't have come unarmed. The silence thickened. Talia stepped between them. He stays. One night. I want to hear everything. Jody gave a tight nod. Fair. She gestured to the kitchen. You hungry, starving. Dinner was simple cornbread beans and what was left of Maggie's smoked pork. They ate mostly in silence. Jody didn't press questions, didn't push his presence. He looked around like he was seeing ghosts. And maybe he was. After the meal, they sat by the fire. Elias leaned back in the old rocker, his leg propped up. Talia sat cross-legged on the floor. Jody rested his elbows on his knees, staring into the flames. I was there, he said finally, when your father got that scar on his neck. Bandit ambush near the Rio. He took a knife to save me. Never blamed me once. Talia's voice was quiet. He never told me that. Your father didn't brag, Jody said. He just bore it. She smiled sadly. Yeah, that sounds like him. Jody reached into his coat, pulled out a small leather pouch. He handed it to her. Inside was a silver pin, a star tarnished with age and engraved with a faded R on one side. He wanted you to have this, Jody said. Said it was your birthright, not mine. Talia ran her fingers over the cold metal chest, tight. He never told me. Because he didn't want you to carry what came with it. That badge, it drew blood. She looked up, and now Jody's voice cracked. Now I think he was wrong. You carry his strength, Talia. But the world don't let you carry strength without also carrying a shield. Elias shifted. The land's her shield. Jody met his eyes. The land might not be enough if Russ Holloway's got his way. Talia's jaw tightened. You know about him, heard he's making a move with some old cattlemen. They want to buy up the East Ridge and push folks like you out. This farm's one of the last holdouts. Elias sat up straighter. You got proof of that, I got names. Deeds being passed behind closed doors. Talia stood pacing. They've been circling like buzzards. I knew it. I knew it wasn't just the debt. Jody nodded. Your father suspected something years ago. That's why he never sold. Said if they got this land, they'd own the whole basin. Talia stopped. So what do we do? Jody leaned forward. You finish the harvest. You get that crop to town before the deadline. I ride ahead to Elk Hollow. I know a man at the recorder's office. We get your title locked before they can challenge it. She looked at him, heart racing. And if Holloway shows up again, Jody's eyes darkened. Then we stop playing defense. Elias stood slowly. You sure we can trust you? Jody didn't flinch. No. But your gut says more than your ears ever will. Talia looked between them, two men shaped by different kinds of scars, both tied to her father, both standing between her and the end of this fight. You came back because of a debt, she said to Jody. He nodded. I owed him. She handed the badge back. Then wear this. Not for him. For me. Because if we're going to war, I need every ghost I've got standing with me. Jody took the badge, eyes shining. Yes, ma'am. Later that night, after Jody had bedded down in the barn, Talia stood with Elias on the porch. The moon hung low, amber, and watchful. You trust him? Elias asked. I don't know, she said, but I believe him. Elias nodded. There's a difference. She looked out at the dark horizon. Tomorrow we finish the wheat. Then we take it to town. And after that... Her voice didn't shake. Then we fight. The wheat stood tall and still in the morning light, the last acre glowing gold beneath a sky streaked with thin clouds. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed in on your ears, the kind that made every sound feel sharper, more real. Talia ran her fingers through the top stalks, feeling their weight, their readiness. This was it. The final row. What they'd bled for broken for. What her father had dreamed of and what she'd nearly lost. Beside her, Elias stood tall despite the tension in his leg. He wore the brace she'd wrapped that morning, stubborn but grateful. The scythe was already in his hand, his grip steady. Jody came up behind them, wiping sleep from his eyes, his saddlebag slung over one shoulder. He'd be leaving by noon to ride into Elk Hollow to file the deeds and warn the recorder. But not before he helped them finish. No one spoke for a long moment. It didn't feel like the time for words. Then Talia looked out across the row and whispered, "One row left. One chance to prove this land still answers to us." Elias gave a single nod, then stepped forward. The scythe arced through the wheat with a sharp swish. Talia followed him, binding, as he cut her fingers, working fast and sure. Jody moved beside them with a rake clearing as they went, his motions smoother than expected for a man who'd spent years off the field. The rhythm settled quickly, cut, gather, bind, drag, like a heartbeat. Each step forward felt like pulling weight from her chest. Each bundle laid down felt like another piece of her father laid to rest. Your pop would have liked this, Jody said, wiping sweat from his brow. He would have called us fools for waiting this long, Talia replied, smiling. Then jumped in to finish the job himself. Elias grunted. Wouldn't have let you use that dull blade either. It's not dull, she said defensively. It's got more burrs than a porcupine's backside. She huffed. You want to do it with a busted leg? No, ma'am, he replied quickly, lips twitching. Laughter cracked between them, brief, raw, honest. The kind of laughter that only came after war and weather had stripped everything else away. They kept working. By midday, the sun sat high, burning down with no wind to ease it. Sweat rolled down their backs, and every step in the dirt kicked up dust that clung to their skin and lungs. but the end was in sight. Talia paused to drink, leaning on a fence post, chest heaving. Her palms ached, her back screamed, but her heart beat wild with something she hadn't let herself feel in weeks. Hope. Jody pulled his flask and took a swig before passing it to Elias. "You still riding out after this?" Elias asked. "Soon as we're done," Jody said. "Recorder's office closes at sundown. If I don't make it today, they can't file until Monday." "That too late," Jody nodded. "For this kind of land grab, yeah." Talia tightened her grip on the post. "Then we finish now." They pushed harder. The last half-acre fell faster than the rest, as if the land itself was ready to be done, ready to move on. And then the final swing. Elias's blade cut the last stalk. The wheat toppled in a clean arc, a golden wave falling still. He didn't say anything, just stood there for a long second, breathing heavy. Talia knelt and gathered the last bundle, her fingers trembling, heart hammering in her chest. She tied it tight, placed it with the others, and stepped back. Silence. Elias looked at her. "It's done." She nodded the words catching in her throat. "It's done." Jody let out a breath and took off his hat, running a hand through his hair. "That's the most beautiful patch of dirt I've ever seen." They didn't cheer. They didn't shout. They just stood there. 3 people bound by soil, sweat, and something older than all of them. Talia felt tears press behind her eyes. She blinked them away. "Let's get it loaded," she said. "We take it to town at first light." "No," Elias said. "We take it now." She turned. "We're exhausted. We don't have the luxury to wait. Russ finds out that field's finished, he'll make his move." "He's right," Jody said. "I'll take the deeds and ride ahead. You bring the wheat. Every bushel in that cart before dusk." Talia looked out over the yard. The old wagon sat ready, 2 horses already saddled. They'd planned on tomorrow, but tomorrow had just become a risk they couldn't afford. She nodded. "All right, let's move." They worked fast, hauling bundles into the cart, stacking them tight. Talia tied down the tarps while Elias loaded from the back. Jody double-checked the harness and fed the horses. The weight of the grain felt different now. Not just heavy, but holy, earned. When they were done, Talia handed Jody a satchel with the signed bank documents and her father's land title. "Don't let anyone touch this," she said. "I won't," he said. "I've ridden into worse." He mounted up, took the reins, and looked down at her. "Whatever happens after today, just know your father was right to bet on you." Then he turned and rode hard down the trail toward Elk Hollow. Talia and Elias stood side by side, watching the dust rise behind him. "We'll beat them," she said. "Yes, we will," he replied. She turned to the wagon. "We get this grain to market, and there's nothing Holloway can do." Elias nodded, but his eyes were scanning the ridge. "Let's move," he said. They hitched the horses, climbed into the driver's bench, and started down the long dirt road into town. The sun dipped behind them, casting the fields in firelight. But ahead, just beyond the next bend, a cloud of dust was rising. Riders, moving fast. Elias saw it first. His voice cut through the heat. "They're not waiting anymore." Talia's hands tightened on the reins. "Then neither are we." She cracked the whip. The wagon groaned forward. The wagon thundered down the dirt road, wheels jarring against deep ruts, grain sacks shifting in the back like they had lives of their own. The sun was sinking fast behind them, spilling gold across the valley. But up ahead, the light was sharp, harsh, blinding. Talia leaned forward, reins tight in her hands. The horses strained under the weight nostrils, flaring hooves pounding like war drums. Elias rode shotgun, his rifle laid across his lap, eyes locked on the rising dust ahead. "They're gaining," he said. Talia didn't look. "Let 'em. You think they'll just talk?" "No," she muttered. "I think they'll try to stop us. Then we better make sure they don't." Another curve in the road, and the wagon bounced so hard one of the ropes snapped. A bundle of wheat tumbled from the back, thudding into the dirt. "Keep going," Elias shouted, gripping the rail. "I can't lose the whole harvest. You lose the land if we stop." She swallowed the scream building in her chest and cracked the reins harder. The horses surged forward. Behind them, hooves echoed 6 riders, maybe more. She didn't have to see their faces to know who led them. Russ Holloway. The road narrowed, boxed in by rock and scrub. No room to turn, no room to slow down. Just straight ahead into the flatlands before Elk Hollow. Elias turned, rifle raised. "You see the ridge up ahead, yeah? If we make it there, we've got line of sight on the town. How far behind are they?" He squinted. 2 minutes. Maybe less. Talia growled through clenched teeth. "Then we better buy time." He fired a warning shot into the air. It cracked like thunder across the dry wind. The riders didn't flinch. "They're not bluffing," Elias muttered. "No," she said. "They're desperate." One of the riders surged forward, a red bandana across his face, revolver raised. Elias waited, counted, then fired once. The rider spun sideways, falling hard. His horse screamed and veered off into the brush. The rest of them slowed just enough. Elias reloaded. "That won't hold him for long." "We don't need long," Talia said. "We just need to reach the rise." The wagon burst out of the canyon and into open plains. The ridge loomed ahead, maybe a mile. In the distance, the first buildings of Elk Hollow glimmered in the heat. Talia could see the church steeple, the grain mill, the water tower, so close. Then a shot rang out. The bullet ripped through the wagon rail just behind her. She ducked instinctively, heart hammering. Elias didn't flinch. He fired back, then shouted, "They're flanking left. I see them." She yanked the reins right hard, just enough to make the wagon lurch away from the low ground. Another shot slammed into the side panel. The horses screamed, but held. Elias turned. "I count 5 left." "We outrun 'em," Talia snapped. "Or we don't make it at all. They'll block the road before Elk Hollow. They know we're trying to file." She gritted her teeth. "Then we don't take the road." Elias turned toward her, eyes narrowing. "You're not thinking. There's a path through the creek bed. It's rough, but it cuts under the ridge. We used it for cattle drives when I was a kid. Wagon won't like it. I don't care if it falls apart as long as we're in town when it does." He hesitated, then nodded. "Show me." Talia veered the wagon, left wheels skidding in the dirt. The horses hesitated but followed, charging into the dried-up creek bed, hooves kicking up broken stones and dust. Behind them, the riders shouted. At least 2 tried to follow. The trail narrowed, winding between scrub and rock. Overhead, the walls climbed steep, red and jagged. "Stay low," Elias warned. "It's perfect ground for an ambush." Talia ducked slightly, but her focus stayed ahead. She knew this land. She knew every bend, every drop. Her father had taught her the curves of this canyon, like he taught her how to throw a rope or load a rifle. Another shot cracked behind them, then another. Elias turned and fired twice. Shouts echoed off the stone. The riders didn't follow this time. Cowards when the ground wasn't flat and in their favor. Talia drove the wagon over a rise, the jolt nearly tossing her sideways. Then the creek bed spilled out onto a grassy ridge and the whole town opened below them. Elk Hollow. Less than half a mile. Talia choked on the rush of relief. "We made it," she gasped. Elias looked behind them. Not yet. The riders had split. Two had gone around the long road and were cutting in fast, trying to meet them before the town gates. "They're trying to head us off," he shouted. Talia didn't answer. She slapped the reins again. "Faster, boys," she called to the horses. "Don't give out on me now." The wagon barreled down the hill, grain jostling violently in the back. Wheels groaned. The right one wobbled. Elias clung tight to the side rifle, ready. As they reached the road leading into town, two riders burst out from a side trail, guns drawn. Elias fired first. One man fell from his horse. The other fired back, but the shot went wide. Talia didn't stop. She charged straight through the gap, forcing the last rider to dive off the road to avoid being trampled. Then the wagon flew past to the town's edge, clattering over the wooden bridge into Elk Hollow. People turned. A bell rang. Voices shouted. Jody came running out of the recorder's office, hat in hand, jaw slack. "Talia," he yelled. "What the hell happened?" She pulled the horses to a stop so hard the wagon jerked violently. Elias nearly toppled. She jumped down, grabbed the satchel from beneath the bench, and shoved it into Jody's hands. "Get it signed," she gasped. "Now!" Jody looked at her, saw the riders in the distance, and nodded without another word. He sprinted inside. Talia dropped to one knee, hands on her thighs, chest heaving. Elias limped to her side, hand on her shoulder. "They'll think twice before trying that again," he said. She looked up at him, hair wild dirt and sweat streaking her face. "That was the easy part," she whispered. "Now we hold it." The air inside the Elk Hollow recorder's office was dry and close, the kind of stale heat that clung to paper and people alike. Talia stood just inside the doorway, sweat cooling against her back, her hands still shaking from the ride. The town buzzed beyond the windows, murmurs of townsfolk, whispers of what they'd just seen, of who had chased them and why. Jody stood at the front counter, speaking low with the clerk, an older man with rounded shoulders and a quill that scratched nervously against parchment. Elias hovered behind her, bruised and tight-lipped, his eyes sweeping the street outside through the warped glass. The wagon, battered but intact, sat parked across the way. Grain sacks still tied down, dust coating every inch. The land was safe, for now. But peace never came easy. The clerk finally looked up. "It's filed," he said. "Official as the ink I signed it with." Talia exhaled slowly, like she hadn't breathed in hours. "So the title is locked?" she asked. "No more claims, no more backdoor transfers." The clerk nodded. "White Feather land belongs to you now, fully and legally." He passed her a copy of the deed, sealed with wax, heavy in her hand like a verdict. Jody turned to her. "That's what they tried to steal." Talia looked at him. "Why now? Why after all these years?" Jody crossed his arms. "Because this land ain't just good for wheat. It's water rights, grazing access, and the last stretch between Holloway's ranches and the rail line. Your father always knew it." Elias stepped closer. "He never told her." "He didn't want her burdened by what men would do to take it," Jody said. "Thought if she loved the land for what it gave, she'd protect it harder than if she feared losing it." Talia stared at the wax seal in her hand. He was right. Outside, horses approached. Slow, steady, measured. Russ Holloway. She knew it before she turned. The saloon door swung shut as two men stepped onto the dusty street. Russ in his tailored vest and dark hat, his mustache trimmed, his boots polished. Behind him, Calvin Brock, the wiry one with the quick trigger hand and twitchy left eye. Russ tipped his hat at her like they were neighbors discussing a broken fence. "Miss Whitefeather," he called out, voice warm as molasses and twice as slick. "Heard you made quite the entrance." Talia stepped onto the porch, the deed still in hand. "You missed the show, Holloway. It ended with me owning my land." Russ smiled thinly. "Ah, so that's how it's gonna be." Elias followed her out, rifle at his side, though not raised. Jody stood on her other flank, arms crossed, no gun in hand, just steel in his eyes. Russ didn't flinch. "I hope you understand this ain't personal. It's just business." "You sent men with guns," Talia said. "That's about as personal as it gets." He spread his arms. "Desperate men act desperate. I can't be held accountable for every fool who rides for me. You'll be held accountable for what they tried to take." Russ took a step forward. "Now listen, girl woman," she snapped. He blinked. She stepped off the porch, stopping just a few feet from him, her boots planted in Elk Hollow's main street, her shoulders square but the deed clutched at her side. "You don't scare me," she said. "You never did." Russ's smile faltered. "You think that piece of paper protects you? I know it does. You think you can run a farm that size alone. You think the bank'll be kind when harvest prices dip. I think if I made it this far, you should be very worried about what else I can do." Behind her, voices were rising, townsfolk gathering at porches, stepping out of shops, eyes fixed on the scene. Watching. Listening. Russ saw it too. His jaw tightened. "You got lucky," he said. "That's all." Talia leaned in just enough. "You had a whole damn valley and still wanted mine. That's not business. That's greed dressed like ambition." Russ stared at her for a long moment. Then, without a word, he turned and walked back toward his horse. Calvin hesitated, glaring at Elias, then followed. They mounted up and rode out slow, not in defeat, but not in victory either. Not this time. Talia watched them disappear down the trail, her heartbeat finally slowing. "Is it over?" Elias asked. Jody shook his head. "Men like that don't stop. They just look for another angle." Talia tucked the deed into her coat. "Let them." They stood in silence for a moment before Jody said, "You ought to talk to the town council. Get them on your side. Already planning on it. And you need help come winter," Elias added. "That harvest bought you time, not peace." Talia looked at both of them. "Then stay." Jody blinked. "You serious? I need hands I can trust. Not just for the work, for the fight that might still be coming." Elias looked away for a second, then nodded. "I was already staying. Just didn't want to admit it." Jody grinned. "Hell. Thought I'd ride on, but I reckon I owe this dirt a few more months." Talia smiled, the first real one in days. "Then let's rebuild. On our terms." Behind them, the sun was setting over Elk Hollow, spilling orange fire across the rooftops. The wind carried the scent of fresh-cut grain and dust. They'd held the land. But the fight wasn't over. And for the first time, she didn't feel alone. Rain came 3 days later, soft at first, then heavy as drums across the tin roof of the barn. The fields, stripped clean by harvest, drank it in without protest. There was no more wheat to save, no more fires to put out, just the hush that follows hard work and the silence that demands reckoning. Talia stood in the barn's upper loft, watching the sheets of water blur the hills in the distance. The roof leaked in one corner like always. She could smell the wet hay below and the faint trace of saddle oil. Downstairs, Elias was brushing the horses, moving slow, like every motion carried the weight of something unsaid. Jody had gone to town again, checking in on legal filings, bank whispers, and the pulse of Holloway's next move. But that wasn't what filled the barn with tension. That wasn't what made Elias so quiet. Something else had taken root between them in her chest and in the look he'd given her that morning before saying nothing at all. She heard the barn door open. Bootsteps, then the creak of the ladder. "You gonna stare at the rain all afternoon?" Elias asked from halfway up. Maybe she said. He climbed the rest of the way and stood beside her. They didn't touch, didn't look at each other. Just watched the storm roll. "Place looks different when it's wet," he muttered. "So do people," she said. He glanced at her, then leaned against the beam. "You're not wrong." The silence stretched between them, long and taut. Finally, Talia spoke. "I've been thinking about what we said, or didn't say." He nodded slowly. "Me too. I don't want to guess anymore, Elias. Not about you. Not about what this is." He didn't move. Didn't blink. She stepped closer, her voice steady. "You once told me you were running, that you'd done things you regret. But since the day I met you, all I've seen is a man who stayed." His jaw tensed. "I stayed because you needed help." "No," she said. "You stayed because something about this place calls to you, same way it calls to me." He exhaled low and rough. "You're not wrong. But I didn't come here for redemption, Talia. I wasn't looking to be saved. Neither was I. But here we are." Elias finally looked at her, really looked. The storm reflected in his eyes. "I never meant to get in deep," he said. "I thought I'd fix your fence, maybe patch some walls, then ride on. But you didn't." He shook his head. "No. And it scared the hell out of me." Her breath caught. "Why?" "Because I ain't known steady in a long time. And this place, you feel like something I could ruin just by staying." "You haven't," she said. "You've helped me rebuild what I didn't think I could." He took a step closer. "Then let me say what I should have said weeks ago." She waited. "I'm in love with you, Talia. And it's the kind that doesn't burn fast and die. It's the kind that roots in the dirt and stays through winter." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she reached for his hand, and when their fingers met, it felt like the end of wandering. "I know," she whispered, "because I feel it too. And I'm tired of carrying it in silence." He leaned in then, not in a rush, but like a man coming home. When their lips met, it wasn't fire, it was warmth. Deep. Real. The kind that lingers long after the storm. That night they sat by the hearth, listening to the fire crackle and the rain taper off. Talia read from one of her father's old journals. Elias sharpened his knife hands steady. "I used to wonder if he'd be proud of what I've done," she said softly. Elias looked over. "He'd be proud of who you are." She smiled, but there was something behind her eyes. A question. "Elias, yeah. Why did you really stay that first night?" He was quiet for a beat. "Because when I looked at you, I saw someone fighting like hell not to fall apart. And I knew that fight." She swallowed. "I'm still fighting." "So am I," he said. "But now we fight together." She leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, the rain faded into mist, and the fields exhaled under the weight of a harvest survived. The next morning brought sun again, low and golden. Talia and Elias walked the edge of the north field, where the wheat once stood tall and defiant. Now it was stubble and mud, but it smelled like something fresh, something that would grow again. Jody returned before noon. He found them near the fence line. "They're backing off for now," he said. "Town council's on your side." Holloway's licking his wounds. Talia nodded. "Won't be the last time he tries." "No," Jody agreed. "But next time you won't be standing alone." He handed her a letter, official-looking, sealed with the county's stamp. "What's this?" she asked. "Final transfer of the water rights. Your father had filed it years ago. Got buried in the paperwork. I made sure it got found." Talia opened it, scanned the lines, and let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "Now they really can't touch us," she whispered. Jody smiled. "This land's yours, in blood and ink." Elias looked at her, then out at the valley. "Then it's time we plant something new." Talia folded the paper and tucked it into her coat. "And protect what's already taken root." She looked at both of them, wind brushing her hair. "Tomorrow," she said, "we start planning for spring." Elias grinned. "Thought we'd get at least a day off." She smirked. "Not a chance." They all laughed. The kind of laugh that didn't come from relief, but from knowing that what was built here would last. The spring came quiet. Not the kind of silence born of fear or waiting, but of readiness, of steady breath and soil warming under the morning sun. The wheat field, once a battlefield of wills and sweat and memory, was now dark and damp with promise. Talia stood at the edge of it, boots sunk into soft earth, a sack of seed slung across her shoulder. The wind tugged at her hair. Somewhere behind her, Elias was fixing the fence post that had leaned all winter, while Jody worked near the barn, oiling the wheel hubs on the new cart they'd built together. It felt different now, not just because the threat had passed, or because the deed was safely tucked in the tin box beneath her father's old bed, but because the fear that had clung to her ribs for years, ever since her father first fell ill, had finally let go. She reached into the sack and scattered the first handful of seed into the breeze. "This land don't just hold roots," she whispered. "It holds memory." The seeds fluttered, landed, vanished beneath the waiting soil. She thought of her father, Caleb Whitefeather, his steady voice, his cracked hands, the way he never once told her that the fight would be easy, only that it would be worth it. The land had tried to break him. The world had tried to buy him. But he stayed. And now because of that, she had stayed too. Behind her, Elias's voice rose across the field. "You plan to plant that whole acre one seed at a time." She smiled over her shoulder. "Only the parts I want to grow straight." He walked toward her, wiping dirt on his jeans, the sun casting long shadows at his back. There was peace in his face now, not the absence of trouble, but the knowledge that if it came again, they'd meet it the way they had before, together. He took the bag from her shoulder and shouldered it himself. "Let me carry it for a while. You always say that, and I always mean it." She rolled her eyes, but her heart pulled warm in her chest. They walked in silence down the row. The crows cawed above them, circling lazily, like they had nowhere to be. The scent of turned earth mixed with the pine that edged the property, familiar and grounding. As they planted, Jody came down from the ridge. He carried the mail bag he'd picked up in town. There were a few letters, a catalog, a flyer for church revival, and one envelope stamped with the state seal. Talia took it with a frown. "What is it?" Elias asked. She opened it slowly. Her eyes scanned the page once, then again. "It's from the State Land Board," she said. "They're offering to designate the Whitefeather Farm as a heritage site." Jody raised a brow. "That mean protection?" "It means recognition," she said. Historical and cultural significance. No development, no seizure, just legacy. Elias stepped closer. You want that? Talia looked around at the freshly plowed earth, the barn mended with their hands, the kitchen table where they'd written letters and eaten cornbread, the fence line her father had once patrolled like a sentry. She saw ghosts here, not the kind that haunted, but the kind that reminded. She nodded slowly. Yeah, I do. Weeks passed and spring thickened. The seedlings pushed up from the dirt in green blades that swayed in time with the wind. Cattle wandered the southern pasture again. The creek, which had run dry the year her father died, gurgled softly through the rocks. Life returned not in a roar, but in a rhythm. Neighbors began stopping by again. Men and women who had once kept their distance, unsure how long the White Feather farm would last, now came with pies, with borrowed tools, with stories. They asked what had happened up on the ridge that day, why the Holloway men rode out fast and came back quiet, why Tahlia, who once looked like a girl, trying to hold up a crumbling roof with bare hands, now stood taller than the windmill. She never told them everything. Only this: we stayed, and the land remembered. In early summer, a group from the tribal council arrived, elders from her mother's side. They brought with them a blanket woven in the old patterns and a carved stone etched with the names of the White Feather family. It was placed beneath the sycamore tree at the northern edge of the field, the same tree her father used to rest under when the noon sun turned merciless. It wasn't a grave, but it was a kind of altar, a place to return to when the future felt too loud. They held a small ceremony. Elias stood behind her the whole time, silent but present. Jody stood beside the tree, his hat in hand, eyes red but unashamed. Afterward, one of the elders said, "The earth does not remember the loudest. It remembers the most loyal." Tahlia didn't say anything. She only nodded. At night, she wrote letters, not to the bank or the state, but to herself. Letters she never mailed. Words she folded and placed in the old cigar box her father once kept under the floorboard. Some were full of hope, some full of doubt, some just scratched in ink like prayers. But the last one she wrote said this: "I used to believe land was just something to hold on to, something to fight for. But now I know it holds us too. In the silence, in the storm, in the blood we give, and the roots we leave behind. This land doesn't just grow wheat. It grows memory. And maybe if we treat it right, it grows us into the kind of people who don't run anymore." On the first day of harvest, Tahlia stood at the edge of the field, again the wheat, tall and heavy with promise. Elias stepped beside her, his arm brushing hers. Jody leaned on the gatepost, chewing a straw and pretending not to smile. The scythe rested nearby. She didn't rush. She looked out at the gold stretching past the horizon and whispered, "We kept it." Elias didn't need to ask what she meant. The land, the story, the promise, all of it. She stepped forward, reached for the blade, and began again. Not because she had to, but because it was hers now, and always would be.